Hey, what's up, guys? This is Adam D'Angeli from Rescue Michigan Coalition. It's Saturday night. It is our weekly live stream. We got a different time slot tonight. We thought maybe 8 o'clock was a little too early on a Saturday night for people. So we hope you all are going to join us and participate in the chat because we love the interaction. We've got a special guest this week. He's John Clore from UsAgainstMedia. It's a new organization that has been intensely covering Michigan politics in Lansing and around the state, and they've got lots of interesting stories to tell. And we actually connected with them just this past week at the Senate hearing on the various election reform bills that were up in the Senate Elections Committee. So we're going to talk about that hearing. We're going to talk about the election reform proposal in general, give you guys some news about what's been going on in the past week. And without further ado, let me go ahead and bring him on. John, how are you doing, buddy?
Good. How are you?
Good, man. Hey, I'm glad we got to meet. I heard about you actually just only a few days before that hearing. I was at a local meeting in Oakland County, and they actually were playing the video where you were confronting State Representative Gary Howell about the pile of trash bills, we can aptly call them, that went through the House and are now in the Senate, and then of course then we actually met in Lansing, and we actually hung out for a little bit because the hearing came in late. But then looking at your website, you guys have done some pretty amazing stuff just these past few weeks. So yeah, are you guys brand new, or how long have you been doing this? This you seem like someone that's been involved in politics for a little bit, but I think you're new to most of us. So just tell us a little bit about yourself and where this whole project came from.
I've been in the technology industry for most of my life, over 25 years. So I'm well versed at website development, graphics, promotion. And so, because I used to live in South Beach and I used to be a club promoter too. So it's kind of putting all that together. And it's really weird because I never thought that I would actually be putting all of my skill set together to be promoting politics, because I really don't like politics. I never liked politics. It's just, right? But of course, everything that happened, I'm just going to say it, the 2020 election, it was a fraud. And I just felt like I had to bring my skill set to the fight in any way I possibly can. And at the time, what was burning me up the most was the media. And they were blaming everything that was happening in the entire world. They were amplifying it by at least 100 times and blaming it on Trump. Yeah. And it just really irked me. And so I started my campaign against fake news, the left media. And Us Against Media started out as a simple petition against mainstream media for violation of the FCC rule of not being able to spread false information. That's an actual FCC rule that's been violated multiple times, but nobody's being held accountable. So I put together a petition in hopes to gain attraction and to get some authoritative figures, taking action on this. But that website was hacked, believe it or not, and taken down. I had no idea how it happened or anything. So I switched my platform completely, rebuilt the website, got the petition back up, and it just felt like it was still empty. So, living in Lansing, I have, pretty close access, good access to the Capitol and the Anderson building where the legislative meets each week. And I just started attending the meetings and just getting involved, learning the process, taking part of what's really going on. And I feel like that is what really has the most impact, especially to our lawmakers. So, and it just started building stories around it. Started, because I've always attended rallies and events on the conservative side since the Stop the Steal protest for the 2020 election fraud, because it was completely fraudulent. And it just kept rolling from there. So I thought maybe I should start covering the events as well as writing stories about the bad bills that are coming through. And it just kept steamrolling from there about actually learning how to look into the bills, seeing the discrepancies, and start confronting some of these lawmakers like Gary Howell, who came up with this, recycling oversight, composting oversight, which is increasing cost to the consumer, to the taxpayer, increasing licensing fees, building fees. It's just a whole conundrum of bad repercussions when this bill goes into effect. So
it's amazing how fast you've just jumped into the middle of everything here, because people tend to be really passionate about politics, but it's tough to really see exactly how things really happen in the legislature. And my background was from working there for several years, and most people don't really know what's going on in committees and don't have that kind of front row seat in the arena. But you've done so much so quickly. First of all, just keeping up with everything that's been going on in there, and then actually in some ways making some really great political theater out of some of this. In fact, I'm going to put this on the screen here. This was COVID Man, who came to the House Oversight Committee with looks like a hazmat suit and for extra protection, a laundry basket. And is that a communist Chinese flag you have for a cape there? Is that what that is?
That's the biggest sponsor for the COVID Man. They sponsor COVID Man. I mean, without China, COVID wouldn't exist, right? So
yeah, there's been a lot of interesting developments in the news just this past week about that. And it's funny because I think at some point, and this goes, and actually I should go back, because we were talking in the beginning about really taking on the media as one of the most direct things. And you're right, it's so central. Like when we talk about, and I've done a lot of public appearances for Rescue Michigan, and the point I usually make is that the two big things we're into right now are election integrity reform and reopening the state. And then I make the point, those two issues were not on anybody's radar 2 years ago, or even a year and a half ago, and now they're suddenly the huge thing. But they didn't just come out of thin air. They didn't just pop out of nowhere. But my own political background, I can trace to when I was in high school. I remember when I was in high school, the big stories you would hear repeated in the news every single day, over and over and over again. It was O.J. Simpson, O.J. Simpson, O.J. Simpson, O.J. Simpson, all summer long. Every single night they were covering this case. And I don't know if you remember Lorena Bobbitt, that story, but it was the same thing. And I remember thinking as a kid, like, this can't be all the things that are really going on in the world. What's going on? And then, of course, when I'm in college was the Iraq War and the takeaway of civil liberties around 9/11, and there's always been this element of media manipulation that's always been a constant thread in what's wrong with the entire system in this country. And now it's gotten to the point where it is so extreme and so in your face that I'm glad you guys are taking on the media head on and calling it Us Against Media, because it really is central. So when I go to these meetings and I say, we're talking about election integrity, we're talking about reopening the state, but then I always make the point, grassroots leadership has to be the key to this stuff, has to be the key to real reform, because that's the only way you're going to break through what's going on in the mass media. Like someone who I actually think might be a guest on our show next week, he was a political consultant who does door-to-door work, and he says, if you add up the ratings for all of the major networks, ABC, NBC, CNN, and then all the right-wing ones, Fox News and OAN and Newsmax and all the rest, you're still only at like about 5 million people on a busy night. The huge majority of the country isn't tuning into this stuff every day, but going out and knocking on doors is the only way that we can really connect to people. But anyway, going back to COVID Man here and the things that you guys are doing, I love that you're introducing this lightheartedness to it, that you're making fun of the people that are doing this stuff. So let me see. I'm gonna attempt to play the video that you have here, and I'm not sure it's gonna work, only because of the limitations of my internet connection. But this is UsAgainstMedia.com, and this is, I guess, was this guy the inspiration for COVID Man, Dave LeGrand?
Yes, that is the inspiration. I mean, honestly,
that's amazing. This guy. Oh man.
Yeah, we were just watching the news and we couldn't believe this thing on this guy's face, and it was like, this can't be serious. I said, you know what? We can do way better.
That's a paint sprayer mask.
We can do way better than that. She came up with the helmet idea. I was like, we gotta get a hazmat suit, get the cape. I was like, this guy, he doesn't know what he has in store for him coming.
Yeah, I like Ben Garrison had this cartoon where it was when Fauci started saying everyone has to wear 2 masks. and he made a cartoon where a guy's got one mask on, two masks on, and then a big boot taped around his face. You remember the George Orwell quote? Imagine the future will be a boot stamping on a human face forever. So it's got literally a boot taped around the guy's face and says, "We're one mask, we're two masks. Now we're this boot over your face forever."
That's it.
But Dave LeGrand, he's a strange character. There's different kinds of Democrats in the state house, and some of them are just absolutely rancid, Marxist lunatics like Cynthia Johnson, and then there's some who are much more friendly types who are, well, my district is liberal, and so that's what I am, but I like everybody, and da da da. And
you got
then
there's recent DUI arrest, and then there's the fact that Cynthia Johnson, she hardly ever even shows up to work. Trust me, I'm there. I see.
I'll tell you a funny story about Cynthia Johnson. When she first got elected, because the Democrats are in the minority, right? So the Republicans are all named, they're all the committee chairs and the committee vice chair, minority vice chair, who is a Democrat. Mm-hmm. And on the oversight committee, they had the chairman was a freshman, Matt Hall, and then Cynthia Johnson was to be the minority vice chair of that committee. So on the House floor, Cynthia Johnson and the other Democrats on that committee come up to the committee chairman and they say, "Mr. Chairman, we want your word that you're not going to bring up any legislation this week because we're just getting started here and we haven't had time to put anything together." And so the chairman says to them, "Yeah, that's fine. We're not going to have any legislation this week. I haven't even taken my chairman's training yet." And Cynthia Johnson goes, "Chairman's training? What's this chairman's training? I didn't get invited to no chairman's training." And so the chairman replies, "Well, Representative, that's because you're not the chair. You're the minority vice chair." She goes to the Speaker of the House and files a complaint against him, a formal complaint against him of racism, because she doesn't know what the word minority means. She thought that when he said minority vice chair, he meant like, because you're black, you're a minority, not that you're in the minority party, Representative.
How do people like that
That's the kind of
get
mental
involved?
caliber we're dealing with some of these people.
Oh, how does she even get in office? How do people like that even get in office? This is mind-boggling.
Politics is strange, and a lot of times people run for office, and oftentimes I'm like, especially when they're running for high offices, and I warn them, like, look, you might want to start a little bit lower, because it really is tough, and it often is competitive. But then again, sometimes the exception is the rule, and especially in like in a district like hers, which is all just Detroit. Who knows how the political machine operates down there? And strange things happen. Like, we have a representative, Steve Johnson, who when he first got in, he was the nobody in the race. There were 4 establishment candidates challenging each other, and they all thought nothing of him. And he just went out and knocked on doors constantly. He just went door to door to door, and just that's all he did was beat the streets. And then when the election rolled around, the establishment candidates all basically canceled each other out. They were all attacking each other and not thinking one thing or another about him. So much so that when he won the primary, the news media had to call him up and asked him who the heck he was. I remember the story was Wayland area man becomes nominee for state rep. And
that's awesome.
That's how it goes sometimes. Sorry, go ahead.
No, that's a good story. I had no idea. Thank you for letting me know that. Steve Johnson, he's a hard worker. I mean, I don't doubt that he was out there knocking on doors, getting it done. That's for sure. Yeah.
Johnson, he was one of the few candidates who really always votes his conscience. He and John O'Reilly, I think, are still, maybe Steve Carr does it now, but in the previous term, I think he and Rep. O'Reilly were the only 2 that would post explanations for every one of their votes. Now, that doesn't mean he's perfect, and we've had disagreements on policies here and there, and that's okay. I mean, that's the way it goes. But yeah, guys like that are few. I mean, most of the politicians, they go with what the lobbyists want most of the time. And the other thing is, it's funny, I saw Rep. Riley gave a speech a couple weeks ago, and he made the point, it's like high school, the way the legislature operates. They're cliquish, they don't like to make each other mad, they have their groups of friends. It's not even like college, it is like high school, the way they associate with each other. And part of the result of that is they don't like to vote no on each other's bills, hardly ever. And you have leadership constantly coming over them and saying, "Hey, we're all a team. Let's don't embarrass the team. Every time you vote no on our bills, you're embarrassing our team." It's like, well, sometimes your bills embarrass our team, guys. And that's, I guess, kind of what was going on in the Senate last Wednesday, where they brought up Senate Bill 300, which... do they realize how much it demoralizes the grassroots when we have to be fighting the Republicans to not do something as ridiculous as going ahead and asking for an early election day? I mean, what was your takeaway from that hearing? Because you were there. I mean, what would you make of all that?
I mean, I was honestly getting the energy sucked out of me because we were surrounded by Democrats. We were the only Republicans in the entire room. I remember that. But honestly, it was nothing that hasn't already been done in the actual elections and ethics committee hearing, because I believe everything that pretty much gets heard there before it reaches the Senate, or it could go on the Senate first, but everything that I've heard during the hearing that we were in together has already been brought up in the elections ethics committee, so it wasn't anything new. What I noticed the most was there was a lot of state agencies coming in there, and they were opposing everything.
Yeah.
And I was just like, who are you really working for? You're obviously not working for the people. I think you're coming here with an ulterior motive. Is who's pulling the strings behind the curtain? And I think we know who that is.
Well, I mean, certainly the Secretary of State, no one should be surprised by what her lobbyists are saying. There's no question about that. But you're right. I mean, I remember when the governor and the AG were Republicans, and you still had bureaucrats constantly and doing all the same things that bureaucrats do, asking for more money, asking for more authority, and never is there the question of, is this the right thing for the state, much less even for the, you know, for the Republican movement in general. I mean, you would think they wouldn't be constantly lobbying for things that the other side benefits from, which is what expanding government constantly does. But no, I mean, that's the way it goes. It's really frustrating, and it's such a contrast between when Trump was president. There were so many holdovers from the Obama administration that they never got rid of. And when Biden becomes president, every single Republican immediately is fired. You know, they don't put up with any dissension in the ranks. But our side, it's just like, well, these people know what they're doing, and they were here a long time, and let's just go along with that. But you're right. There was one agency in particular. Actually, it wasn't an agency, and this might be a good point to. A good time to educate our viewers about some of the different kinds of lobbyists in Lansing. In fact, you had an interesting interaction in the beginning of the hearing with the gentleman who says, yeah, I'm a lobbyist. I work for a multi-client.
Yes.
And it's like, okay, well, what does a multi-client mean? And there's different kinds of lobbyist groups out there. Well, first of all, there's the government lobbyists, and that's like the SOS, obviously. And I want to talk in some depth about another one or two, the Association of County Clerks and the Association of Municipal Clerks. But those are kind of a type called association lobbyists. And that's when you've got an association of competing companies in an industry. Sometimes you'll have, for example, like you'll have the Michigan Association of the Michigan Restaurant Association. You've got the I forget the name of it, but the Convenience Store Association. You've got the Beer and Wine Wholesalers Association, groups like that, right? Where there's multiple companies, but sometimes they've got the same interest, so they have an association lobby. The thing about groups like these, though, is that they tend to prefer the clients that give them the most of their money. They tend to always prefer the huge companies over the little tiny ones. And every time there's any kind of contest, they always go for what the big boys want. And then multi-clients, huh?
That's not very fair.
Well, it's not very fair, but then again, why do these small companies pay these people their money to become members in the first place? The idea is supposedly that, you know, we're all in the same industry, but they very often are not. I mean, you've got local farms competing with factory farms. You've got local banks competing with multinational banks, you know, all these different competing interests, and they're not the same. And they don't get the same privileges. The little community banks get screwed over more than anybody else in the financial services industry. The credit unions have their own groups that actually are really good at lobbying. But the Bankers Association, they're not looking out for the community banks. They're looking out for the big ones all the time. And then with multi-clients, you've sometimes got that same problem. You don't have any money to have your own dedicated muscle in Lansing. You'll hire a multi-client to lobby for whatever legislation you're doing. But the problem is they might be taking money from someone on the other side for any other reason. And there's no requirement they even disclose that to you, I don't think. So sometimes they end up on the other side of your very own issue. And I remember seeing that a few years ago where, like, one of the 800-pound gorillas in Lansing is the two utility monopolies. But then they also have these various associations that work with the smaller producers and the municipal producers, which are some of the universities have their own power plants. Some of the smaller towns have their own power plants. But at the end of the day, the utilities control everything. They're not, the lobbyists that work for all of the energy industry are really going to work for the utilities. And if their interests conflict, they're going one way and not the other. So it's weird how that whole game works, and people don't understand necessarily when the Clerks Association comes up and testifies, they think, oh, they work for everybody. But,
you would think.
But what did we hear the clerks say on Wednesday? Oh, we want early voting, right?
Yes.
We want 2 weeks of early voting. We don't just want, and you got to think, that doesn't sound like something most clerks I know would support. In fact, I think most clerks would say, that's a lot of work. I don't want to do work.
Opens the door to more fraud.
Yeah. But
more time to more fraud.
It shows you, though, that the way the clerks, the way these associations operate is they've been taken over by the left, regardless of the fact that they represent Democrat and Republican clerks, because Republicans don't think like we need to seize every lever of power we can possibly grab. But Democrats do think that way. And they run for those seats, and they campaign for those seats. And by the way, how many Republican clerks do you think are really all that Republican?
Very small percentage.
Yeah, maybe so. I mean, well, here's an interesting story. I did a video about this the other day. This happened in Oceana County this past week. So Oceana County, let me get my, like here, basically, it's up on the lake. I think it's like a little bit north of Muskegon, so it's a small county, presumably Republican. I'm sure it went for Trump. Probably the entire county commission, the clerk and everybody there runs as a Republican. Well, what happened was we had a member of the Board of County Canvassers in Oceana County who refused to certify the election. And his reasoning was, I asked for election reform. I asked the clerk to ask the Secretary of State, and I just never heard back. They did nothing for us. So I don't trust this election. I'm gonna refuse to certify it. This was, for those of you who don't know, the Board of County Canvassers, there's 4 members, 2 Republicans and 2 Democrats. The parties nominate 3 choices, and then the county commission has to vote on who the 2 are from each party that they pick. So ostensibly, you've got 2 Democrats, 2 Republicans on the board. So one of the Republicans says, I'm not going to certify this election because I just don't trust it. Now, maybe that's right, maybe that's not. But what happened next was the county clerk says, you're suspended from the Board of County Canvassers. Now, the county clerk has absolutely no legal authority whatsoever to do that. None.
Yeah, wasn't that the right? Aren't they supposed to say, hey, if I don't trust this election, I'm not going to certify? Isn't that what they're supposed to do?
Maybe. I mean, I think it depends. I think they have to show cause. Now, it's interesting because there's actually a lawsuit pending on a much bigger issue right now. Unlock Michigan was the group that got all the signatures last year to repeal the Emergency Powers of Governor Act. And they turned in their signatures last fall. The Secretary of State stonewalled on saying the petitions were good. She finally said, okay, yeah, the signatures are all verified. You got plenty of them. There was an interesting story, let's say, where supposedly some subcontractor for the group was telling people to do things that weren't legal, but it turned out, of course, this was a Democrat operative. A Democrat operative filmed the person making the statements and everything. They took every one of the signatures that they collected, put them in their own separate box, sent that box off to the Attorney General's office, sent the good boxes off to the SOS. So the AG does an investigation, and because they're all Democrat operatives, I think, she concludes, oh yeah, they didn't do anything illegal, so I guess there's nothing we can do about it. That's all, folks. Have a nice day. But now they have the petitions. They got the petitions in. 500,000 Michiganders signed a petition to end the lockdowns. And what happens? The Board of State Canvassers, the 2 Democrats, say, we're not going to certify these petitions. We think we need to have another investigation. So Unlock Michigan has now sued those members of the Board of State Canvassers. So that's a live issue right now. But it's before some court, so we don't know where that's going to go. But either way, in this county, the clerk had absolutely no legal authority to suspend a member of the Board of Canvassers. But it begs the question, what's that clerk's motive? First of all, what does she even care? If you have 3 of the 4 certify the election, it's still certified, right?
Right.
So there's some kind of political vendetta going on there.
Yeah, there's definitely. It's just, I don't get it. They cry this unity, spiel, but they practice they practice the exact opposite. I just don't get it. What kind of unity is that? Aren't they supposed to work together? The party's supposed to work together somehow. And I don't even understand the whole visual aspect of when you walk in there. I get this persona like it's a divided room. Right when you walk in, you got the
when you go to vote.
Well, no, we're just walking into a committee room.
Oh, a committee room, right. Well, yeah. Well, they are divided.
It's like, wow, it's the left and the right. It's really there,
Yeah.
Yeah, I don't know. Maybe they should seat, every other one. Maybe Democrat, Republican, just to give them a different persona, different feeling.
Yeah.
It's just the whole.
It is an adversarial process, and I think with respect to the elections, that's something that people have to keep in mind, because when you saw what was going on in that committee room, they're constantly trying to make the argument everything we do is for the voters, and this is fair access, and all that we want are things that, well, they actually all happen to benefit us politically, but we're going to frame it the way we want to frame it. It's like, yeah, well, fine, that's the way it goes. Sure. Yes, you would like aliens, felons, and minors to vote because they would vote Democrat. But that does not mean that it's the right policy. Yeah, you'd like to have an election, a 2-week early voting period, because the more stragglers you get in, those who are least likely to vote tend to be the ones that vote Democrat. But there's this whole, this isn't an adversarial process, and that's complete garbage. Of course it is. They're competing for power. And that's why you're supposed to have people from both parties administering the election, why you're supposed to have challengers from the other party. So if they're checking each other. It's like the checks and balances system. You've got to have people on both sides so that they can't just run away with the whole thing from start to finish.
Gotcha.
But
I like it, man. You do give a lot of insight to this. Like I said, I'm a noob in the political game, and I really appreciate your expertise because you've been in this game for quite some time.
Well, you're a fast learner, man. I gotta say, I mean, that bit with that bit with COVID, man, was hilarious.
I appreciate it. You get fed up, and at some point, I think it was, at the point where it was after the election, we still had these lockdowns. We got the election stolen from us. We're still miserable because of these mandates, these unconstitutional mandates. And at that point, I realized the bullhorns weren't working. Nobody's going to take us really seriously. So I said, maybe mixing a little comedy into it is going to get more attention, get more people maybe involved with getting in front of our legislators and making an appearance. But I really wanted to make a point at Dave LeGrand, like, come on, man, you're being a little kooky there. I think we can be a little kookier than that.
Yeah, and they all, I think Saul Alinsky said, it's all, ridicule is one of the most powerful political weapons because they don't know how to handle it, and because they can't stand the thought that what they're doing isn't as serious as they all pretend it is. And and it really is cutting. I mean, that's why they flipped out like crazy when Ron Weiser called them the three witches, meaning Benson, Whitmer, and Nessel. I mean, that's the kind of thing where, they hate that idea of ridicule. And the more of that, the better. I'll tell our viewers a funny story. A buddy of mine in Arizona, they have traffic cameras out there. And one of the things that they did was they actually tarred and feathered a traffic camera van. And the way they were able to do it legally was they didn't actually use one of the traffic camera vans. They got a white van that looks very similar to one of their vans, and they used, non-permanent tar. They didn't obviously use literal tar, but they used like mud or something that would eventually wash off, and they got a bunch of feathers. So they parked the car at the side of the road, and they just started tarring and feathering the minivan. And of course, before too long, someone calls the cops. right? I mean, that doesn't take very long at all. So eventually the cops arrive and they're still doing it. And now the news is coming because the news has heard about this. So it becomes a local news story. Meanwhile, as the news is covering it live, the cops are asking the people about the van. And do you have, what's going on here? Do you have permission to do this? And they're like, well, yeah, we're just decorating a van here. Well, whose van is this? Oh, it's Congressman Schweikert's van. He was in on the whole thing from the beginning. So they were able to get away with it, and they were able to get news coverage and really draw attention to it. And then another time, I think it was that same year, they did a stunt. It was around Christmas time, and they got a bunch of guys to put on Santa costumes, and they made up Christmas present boxes that would fit over the traffic cameras. And they would put them over the cameras, and because they weren't actually damaging the cameras, they couldn't be prosecuted for, you know, malicious destruction of property or anything like that. But once again, people started seeing the Santa Clauses putting down the boxes over the traffic cameras, and they called the news, and of course became a news story. And eventually the news media got around to asking them, or I think the police got around to asking them, you know, can we talk to some of these people? We just have to ask them a few questions. And they said, sorry, man, they actually shipped out to Afghanistan this morning. They were all U.S. military that were set to deploy the next day. So they were all gone, and there's nothing they could do about it.
Nothing.
But,
that's awesome.
But yeah, that kind of stuff is real clever. So hey, man, I've been yammering for a while here. Tell me about, because you guys are really busy. You went to like 3 different events today, including there was a gun rights rally in Fowlerville, and I'd heard about it. I didn't have the time to get over there, but how was it? What was going on over there?
There was a big turnout. There was a lot of speakers. A two-way rally. Of course, you know, that's Second Amendment, is protection of gun rights. It was amazing. We had a lot of political candidates speaking. We had Ryan Kelly, who's running for governor. We had Mike Detmer, who's running for congressman. Here, he's going to be taking over the Lansing district, because hopefully he's going to take out Alyssa Slotkin. You know, I live in Lansing, so she's my district rep, or not my district, but state district rep. Yeah. But I noticed that her sign, vote for Alyssa Slotkin, was right across from the polling station where we voted, where I voted for, you know, the opposition, of course, which were Republican.
Yeah.
But I thought that was kind of fishy. But there was a lot of other speakers there. A lot of I haven't heard before, because, like I said, I'm new in the game.
I heard Theron was there. Do you know who Theron is?
I don't.
Oh, you'd probably know him if he was there, or maybe he was speaking when you were just another location. He's a commentator on Wham Radio in Ann Arbor, which I think is 1400 AM.
Okay.
Maybe it's 1600. Hold on, I don't get that wrong. Let me look it up real quick. Wham Radio. But
yeah,
Theron is very hardcore, and he speaks at a lot of events like this. He's a really cool guy. So anyway,
but I like to interview a lot of the people who are just attending too, to get their insight as to what's going on. I interviewed the couple who is actually hosting the event, who own the property, and just going through their story of some of the stuff that they had to go through during these unconstitutional mandates is just amazing. But I'll leave it to the story. I don't want to unravel too much, because I still have to do the edit and create that whole story. But that brings me to another point. You know, it's not myself doing this. You know, I have my wife who helps me a lot. She's my camera woman, I guess. I want to be politically correct. She's my camera woman. She does a great job. And then I have another guy behind the scenes. His name is Adam Boyd. He does a lot of our video editing. He does excellent work on writing articles. He also attends some of the committee hearings with us and does some of the interviewing. I'm sure you've seen him in some of the videos. Yeah. We have Celeste Mantag, who is a Detroit resident, and she also writes a lot of articles for us. So, you know, trying to get a team established so that way the work can be a little less cumbersome. Yeah. One particular person, that definitely helps. You know, it helps, you know, you being able to attend different rallies and protests, as well as the committee hearings and stuff. I mean, it starts. Yeah. There's too much for any one group to cover everything. Yes. But you guys are hitting all the right ones. I mean, that elections committee was a spicy one. Yeah. And you know, going back to what you were saying earlier about how we were like the only conservatives in the room. Oh. You know,
there's
for a second.
huh? You know, I ought to hit the record button just to make sure that I save a copy of this, because what ended up happening a few weeks ago, I was interviewing these two attorneys who were involved in a lot of important litigation, and about 15 minutes into our stream, it went dead. My phone just suddenly disconnected from the internet. I live out in the woods where I cannot get a high-speed internet connection. I call Comcast, they say, we don't serve that area. I call Spectrum, they say, sorry, only Comcast serves that area. So my phone is my internet, and sometimes things go wrong. So
Gotcha.
anyway,
Yeah.
fortunately I had the record button on, so I was able to salvage it, although we lost the chat, and that was really, really frustrating.
Wow, for your phone, it's doing amazingly well. That's pretty impressive. To be honest with you.
Technology, man, I tell you.
Yeah.
But anyway, yeah, what you guys have been covering is some of the more relevant stuff out there. I mean, a lot of what's going on is mostly just gossip, you know, people talking about, and not that it's not important. I mean, I just saw the story about the latest explanation for the governor's private jet to Florida to visit her dad.
Oh, yeah.
Where first she wouldn't say who it was, and then of course it came out it was a billionaire's jet. And it was obvious what happened was that someone let her fly on it, which is technically a gift, which is totally illegal. So now the story is that her campaign is paying for it with a fund that she just created for it.
Mm-hmm.
So the story keeps changing and changing. Here's the story right here. Aid fund created after Whitmer's election paid for the trip. Well, that was not what the story was a week and a half ago. No. Before the story was, and by the other aspect of that too was her dad. Anyway, point is, this is the kind of stuff the major media will talk about, and it's all well and good that they're exposing Whitmer's scandals and this and that, but no one really is talking about the nuts and bolts of what goes on in the legislature and what goes on in some of these local, in some of these municipalities. By the way, speaking of that, Ann says not all municipal clerks are elected. Most are appointed by city managers or appointed by city council. Well, let me make this point. Every bureaucrat can always be traced back to some elected official, and that's where you got to slam the pressure on. So if the clerk's a city manager, attack the city manager. Hey, why is this person your clerk? If there's a bureaucrat in the executive branch, you beat up the governor. I mean, there's always someone that they are accountable to that has an elected office, and that's where you gotta go after him at.
Yeah.
And this is the kind of stuff where we're talking about why it's so important for people that are following this stuff locally. I mean, we've got some grassroots groups out there now that are now going to their county commission meetings, going to their school board meetings, and it's a ton of work. It is an absolute pain to, but I mean, it's important that people discover what's going on in some of these places. We've got, I don't know if you heard about this story. Let me see if I can pull this up. Hold on one sec. This is apparently what happened was a parent was confronting the Rochester Hills School Board in their meetings, and as a result, the members of the school board contacted her employer and got her fired. And now she is filing suit in federal court. So we will see where, and they're also organizing recalls against the members of the school board. So the stuff that happens it's happening everywhere, and this is one of those reasons why we keep encouraging everybody, you gotta get involved locally, and we can coordinate some of the statewide stuff, and that's one of the reasons we got these forums on our site, is so that when it comes to legislative tracking, people don't have to reinvent the wheel every which way, because you've got these different committees. You've got, you know, about I think 24 committees in the House and Senate. You can't have 24 different people in every single local group tracking all that, but yeah, there's, I mean, the stories are endless, you know.
I checked out some of the tools that you have on Rescue Michigan. It's pretty impressive. I tell you what, the petition tool. Wow.
Yeah.
Who thought of that?
Well, I mean, I wasn't the first to think of it, but I've worked in other organizations that have done those kind of petitions before. But one of the things that we do that I don't know if other groups do is if you're a dues paying member, and by the way, the reason we have to require people pay dues is to keep the other side from using it for free. But if you get to the, if you get into the site, it's not a lot, it's $35. You can create your own petitions, and you get to keep the email lists of the people that sign them, so that you can actually grow an organization around your issue. And that's great, because we can't take on every single issue under the sun here. I mean, I'm an all of the above conservative. You know, I care about gun rights. I care about I mean, like I said, everything from economics to schools to down the whole line. But everyone has their own priorities. Everyone has their own issue set, and voters don't always have the same issue set either. I remember I was working on a campaign, and the candidate was very much a supporter of traditional marriage. This was in 2014. And we did tests to see, because you would assume, oh, everyone who supports traditional marriage is going to be pro-life, right? Wrong. They were not. There was like about 2/3 of anyone that supports traditional marriage was pro-life, and about 2/3 of everyone that's pro-life supports traditional marriage. But that's enough to be different. And if you're tackling 100 different issues at once, what's going to happen is people are going to see one issue they disagree with, and they're going to be done with you. Yeah. And that's why politicians are always campaigning on pablum and not talking about every single issue, is they think it's divisive. If I say, like, and I don't know what your issue is and everything, but if I say I'm a rock solid conservative, I'm pro-life, I'm for a secure border, but I think we should have reasonable gun restrictions, what are you going to think about that if you're a gun rights supporter?
Well, obviously you're going to be opposed to that.
Yeah, you're not going to vote for, you're done with me. I'll find someone else, buddy.
Yeah.
So anyway, that my point being, that's why you have multiple organizations tackling different things, because, you know, I think opposing lockdowns and supporting election reform are about as common sense as any issue can get here. But even opening our state isn't entirely. And that's, I think, where we have to draw a line in the sand and say, look, I'm sorry, if you're a Republican voter, but you're in favor of lockdowns and mask mandates and forced vaccinations, sorry, we're gonna have to keep defending this issue no matter what. And I think a lot of the reason why people are on that side is because they've bought into what the mass media is constantly pushing on people. And
honestly, I think a lot of people, I'm sorry, I don't mean to interrupt.
No, I've been talking too much. You please do talk.
No, I think that, you know, the thing is that people have lost a lot of faith, because we know that there was fraud, and, you know, we don't have to look at all the evidence, because, I mean, all the evidence was refused to be looked at by the people that were supposed to look at it, okay? Mm-hmm. Without saying that, we just know, with all too many questions, not enough answers, whenever you have a scenario like that, you know there's something wrong, and your intuition is literally what I call, it's God's voice. Okay, that's my intuition. When all that is working in unison, it's definitely a problem. So the fact that we had this 2020 election that was completely a fraudulent, you know, stolen election, because we have a commander in chief, not a commander in chief. The fact that it was stolen, you know, and nobody's being held accountable for anything. Major felonies were committed.
Yeah. And
why isn't anybody going to jail? Why isn't anybody, you know, in jumpsuits and behind prison bars? Because now people are like, it doesn't matter what laws you guys create in Legislature. It doesn't matter, because nobody's ever going to be held accountable. So your laws don't even add up to a pile of beans. Seriously.
Well, I mean, to that point, and yeah, you're right. That is the way a lot of people are reacting to all this. But what I would point out is that, first of all, most people in this last election were absolutely not ready for the level of opposition, criminal opposition, they were getting from the Democrats. I mean, I was involved, I actually became a poll worker for the city of Detroit. There weren't many of us, and there were some that applied and got turned away because they were controlling that environment. But there weren't enough that applied to begin with. There weren't enough poll challengers in the room. And for the ones that did get, and just to clarify for the audience, he's right. Impeding poll challengers is a felony in Michigan, and that is what they did. Mm-hmm. But people didn't know what to do when these things occurred. They'd say, okay, well, if they're calling the police, I'm turning on my video camera, so I've got evidence. I'm getting down the officer's badge number and name of the person who escorts me out of the polling place. I'm getting the name of the poll worker that reported me. I'm contacting this person as a witness. I'm taking pictures on my phone. I don't care what the rules are. You're committing a crime and I'm going to catch you doing it. You know, stuff like that. There was a lack of training that I don't think we're going to have a problem with in the next election. And you're right, though, that the courts really did do everything possible to refuse to hear this. And I think there's got to be an all-out effort. There has to be, some of it's things we can do as individuals, better training, better planning and preparation. Some of it's going to be legislatively, and that's what we're working on with the citizen-initiated law, which, by the way, folks, I don't want to overpromise and underdeliver, but there's some news coming on that real soon. I think no later than Memorial Day, we're going to have the reform plan on hand and ready to go. I think. And then there's also still yet perhaps opportunities for litigation, and in the next election for creating those opportunities. We had a couple of attorneys on a few weeks ago who are suing the Secretary of State on behalf of someone that requested a recount and paid for a recount and had her poll challengers impeded. And if it's shown that the Secretary of State violated their rights in that, it's going to probably go right back on the lawsuit that we won before the election, that you had to agree to change your policies and alert everybody that you can't impede poll challengers using social distancing rules. There may be a contempt of court motion on that yet. So I would say keep the faith on this. Go ahead.
I really liked the testimony that you gave before the Senate. And when you played the actual training recording from the TCF, was that from TCF training? That was
for the in-person polls. I wasn't at TCF. I was a regular poll worker. I was a ballot box inspector at a regular polling place in Detroit. And I was sitting in training in Detroit. They started 45 minutes late. So as I'm just sitting in my seat playing on my phone to pass the time, it occurs to me, I might want to download an app just to record whatever they say, because I might want to take notes for my own benefit, And so I recorded the entire thing start to finish. In fact, it occurred to me after the hearing, there was another part of that training I meant to play for them too. So the part of the training I played was to confront they had the Secretary of State come up and the ACLU, and they testified that they don't impede poll challengers. When poll challengers get expelled, that's because they do multiple things. And so I got up and said, no, I was a poll worker. I can tell you as a matter of fact, because this is how they trained me. In fact, here's the tape. And the tape was where the instructor for the election official is training the poll workers. And she says they have to wear masks and they have to stay 6 feet back, which is important because they can come behind your table, but if they don't have 6 feet, they can't come back there. Mm-hmm. And of course, the law clearly says poll challengers have the right to be able to review the poll books, to be able to review all the procedures, because that's what part of their duties are. And so the trainer was literally telling them. And then what happened was a student comes up and says, well, if they have to be 6 feet back, they can't actually see. And she goes, exactly. Not unless they got really good vision or they brought their binoculars. And then they all start laughing. Yeah. But the clip I wish I'd pressed on to play, because the ACLU testified that this isn't really a problem. This is their bill to enshrine the rights of poll challengers more than they already are. And what I want, I was mostly just making the point because I wanted to get the message in with that recording, but I did push back a little bit on them for the problem that might arise that a judge interprets this bill to mean they didn't have those rights in the first place, which they do. And that's why I was talking about these cases and everything. But anyway, what they were saying on the tape just a minute later is one of the kids in the training, and they were kids, by the way. These were 16 and 17 year olds. It's who they brought in to be poll workers. Most of the people in that room were 16 or 17. So anyway, so one of them gets up and says, or raises his hand and says, so what if the poll challenger start making a scene and they're getting loud, and the trainer cuts them off? 911. Call the police on them. Have them thrown up on out of there. And what I should have done right there and then is said, they just instructed children to commit felonies. Right there is what they did. 911. Call the police on their emergency line. Because, the city of Detroit doesn't have emergencies on election day, do they? This was not a last resort. If they continue to be disorderly, you have to throw them out. No, call the police as a first resort. Call 911, call the emergency line, have them kicked out immediately, just because they're getting loud about the rights that they actually do have. It's pretty crazy. We'll bring them up. We'll bring all those tapes up when these bills come up in the House hearing. How about that? Good. Yeah, they need to hear them. They really do. Hey, we got a question in the chat. Please share more details on the initiative. What do you need help with? So if you go to rescuemichigan.com, there is a link on the homepage, and it's also on the drop-down menu that says Election Reform Plan. What it is essentially what can become a citizen-initiated election reform law. And I can't answer the question fully because it's a lot to unpack. There's like a 119-page bill there. It's going to get pared down, I'm sure, because what has to happen is to sign an election reform law without the governor's signature, you have to collect 500,000 signatures of registered voters. That's the only way that we can change the election law before the next election. Because anything that we do meaningfully the normal path, the governor will veto. And if we try to do it by a constitutional amendment, it goes to the ballot on 2022 and therefore won't be in effect in time for the next election. So what we're talking about is developing a policy that we can raise the money to collect the signatures for. And this is all in motion, by the way, folks. And I haven't been too open about all the details of this yet, except for all the videos I've done on the website where we talk about all the policies. So check that out at rescuemichigan.com on the election reform tab, and you can see all about that stuff. Anyway, where were we here? That hearing. A mouthful, huh?
Yeah, so that was a mouthful.
Yeah, but that hearing though, I mean, those hearings are, I mean, in some way they're political theater, and in some ways, sometimes the lawmakers actually look to those things to get their talking points. I mean, I've seen bills go through the committee where when we look at the bill later on, we look and we're like, oh, this is expanding government. This is infringing on civil liberties. This is making the playing field uneven. So this is when I was working for Rep. Riley. So he would go on and vote no. The policy memo would say arguments in opposition, none known. Sometimes you really got to have people that show up to these things. Yeah. So I'm glad you guys are doing this. Keep covering them, man, and keep encouraging people to do this.
We need more people to show up, and hopefully we can encourage others to step up, because honestly, anybody can do this. Anybody can go there and just, voice their opinion. You can testify. If you feel like a bill is bad, get up there and say why you feel like it's bad, because they want to hear from you. It actually helps to enforce what they have to say or what position that they have, if it's for or against a bill, or if there's a specific argument within a bill. If you happen to feel the same way and you bring that up, guess what? It reinforces that argument, and it's just it's better all the way around, face to face. You need to be there. They want to see how you feel about certain aspects that pertain to your laws and in your life. Yeah. So it's a lot. I don't know why more people aren't showing up. I mean, I guess Wendy Williams is more important than what laws are getting passed and what's going to actually determine how your future is going to be and the state that you live in. Come on, people. We need you to start showing up and attending these committee hearings.
Yeah, it's amazing. I'm amazed they didn't require us to wear masks and all that other garbage, but that's probably only because the Republicans are in power there. But it's still a public place, and it's amazing. When I worked in the legislative office, you'd be amazed how few calls and emails we even get from people. I mean, to the point where if you got 1,000 of them on any given bill, that was a red alert, way more than we would ordinarily. I mean, usually the phone only rang maybe 7 or 8 times a day from a constituent with some kind of issue with a bill. I mean, that's the reason.
Do the emails actually work, or do they just go to like a filtered spam box or something?
Oh no, they absolutely do work. I mean, the way it works is the politicians live in constant fear of alienating any significant amount of their constituency, because either they're running for re-election in a tough seat and they don't want to lose, or they don't want to lose majority, and they are scared to death of that. That is what keeps them up at night. I remember the first time I went to one of the first staff meetings working in the legislature, the chief of staff comes up and says, always remember when I say, may you never know what it's like to be in the minority. And that's a real thing, because if you look at the election outcomes, they're often quite close. And going back to when you were talking earlier about how people think there's nothing they can do, look, folks, there was some election fraud, and that's enough to make a difference. Might have been enough in Arizona, might have been enough in Georgia, probably was. Might not have been enough in Michigan, but it might have been. But they're not stealing every vote, okay? We do polls. You have friends and family that voted for Biden, if you have any friends and family. So yes, they can do things to cheat, but there's only so far that actually goes. And by the way, this isn't the first election they've ever cheated in. It's not like they've never thought to do this before, ever. It's a fact of life. So with or without cheating, elections are still in play. And politicians really don't want to have a lot of angry voters. Angry voters make them nervous. Angry voters make them have to work a lot harder. They want an easy re-election. They don't like when they have, it's like we say, a politician is like a Pavlovian dog. Pain and pleasure are what they understand. Pain is what makes it more difficult for them to get reelected. Money is what makes it easier. Well, pleasure in general, which money is the main source of that pleasure, but also, things like good press, praise from constituents, volunteers for the campaign, that kind of stuff. When they get angry voters, nasty letters in the press, when they get yelled at their constituent meetings, when people don't give them money, when they get a primary challenger, that's a dang huge amount of pain for a politician. They like to avoid that. They like to avoid that intensely. So
well,
yes, those things do matter.
A lot of that. They're going to be facing a lot of that coming up. I mean, trust that. This is going to be. I see a lot of people getting into the political game, honestly, on so many different areas and levels. Yeah. On the city council level, the delegates, the lowest level, which I'm running for delegate here in Lansing.
Awesome.
I feel like I have to. So is my wife. There's too many slots that are left open here in Lansing. So because there's no Republicans. I mean, there are a few, but not taking up the delegate slots. So I mean, why not fill them? Yeah,
and here's the point I would make too. Democrats don't have that attitude of, oh, we can't win, so we're not going to try. I mean, in John Riley's district, that's a 65-35 Republican seat. Democrats still worked their tails off to damage him in every way possible they could. Still didn't help. He still won by 63% of the vote. But they know those little bits matter. Because those are votes for governor, attorney general, secretary of state, Congress. And those seats are in play. I'm in the most liberal county in Michigan, Washtenaw County. We went 3-1 for Joe Biden. But you know what? That still means there were 50,000 Trump voters in this county. And those are people that can get organized. And not every single municipality in Washtenaw County is Democrat. But in some of them, you have Democrats who are rolling over Republicans. And this is the stuff we were talking about earlier with the clerks. I mean, in the city of Chelsea, you've got, which is a Republican area, but you have Democrats in control of the city. Because they shriek the loudest and they bully and browbeat everybody, and they're pushing cynical racist theory and everything else. And Republicans don't stand up and fight this stuff. So yeah, by all means, get involved in your county. And you might find you can't win the state house district maybe, but you might win some county commission seats. You might win some municipal elections, and you might maximize enough votes for the Republicans in the races coming up next year to help get them over the line for Attorney General, Secretary of State, and Governor. And that could be a big thing. I mean, remember, Trump only won Michigan in 2016 by, 15,000 votes out of 10 million? Or the big story in 2000 was Bush won the presidency by 537 votes in Florida. So I don't buy that it's too hard to do anything for, because when you get involved for a while, you see that the small things do add up.
They do. It's all the finite details that make for a perfect product, honestly. Perfect outcome. You have to look at all the details. And
as a journalist, you might get a story that changes the course of politics in Lansing. As you stay at it, as you start to become familiar with these faces. But you're talking about Gary Howell earlier. The big story about Gary Howell wasn't him, but the guy who he replaced.
I would like to hear that story.
Okay, yeah, this is a good story. And it's funny because this is how Gary Howell became a state representative. Because when you're talking about running for office, there's obviously the district makeup, and there's all these different factors going on in the year, but there's also what time of your life is it? Who else is going to run? What time of life is it for them? You never know. So the fact that Gary Howell happened to get in was because he had the qualifications and was in the right place at the right time. But why was it the right place and the right time? Well, here's what happened. In 2014, there were 3 Republican candidates that got elected who were widely seen as being very, very, very outspoken conservatives. And the Lansing media was calling them the Three Amigos. It was the three of them were Gary Glenn from Midland, Cindy Gamrat from Allegan County, and Todd Courser from Lapeer, which is now Gary Howell's seat. I was working for Gary Glenn at the time. Gary Glenn was a seasoned political operative who'd been involved in politics for decades. He knew right away he didn't want to be tied to everything that the other two were doing. And he brilliantly extricated himself out of that for all time and went on to serve with distinction. Cindy Gamrat and Todd Courser decided they're going to take on the Lansing Mafia. Gary Glenn's a big sellout. We're going to do what's right and just and da-da-da-da-da. Well, after a few weeks in Lansing, things seemed to get a little strange in their offices. They decided they're going to combine their offices and combine their staff together. And that was really kind of odd. And the media kept saying, yeah, that seems a little strange. And, well, before you know it, rumors are starting to go around that these two are having an affair. And they've got spouses and children at home, both of them. Well, turns out they were. And here's how we found that out. So Todd Courser, the guy that Gary Howell would replace, starts getting text messages coming in from an anonymous number saying, I know you're sleeping with Cindy, and I'm going to tell everybody if you don't resign. So Todd Courser goes to his staff. And he says, all right, here's what we're going to do. You're going to go home and you're going to start planting fake stories in the news. And you're going to say, I'm a homosexual drug addict who's taking guys out behind the strip club in Lansing and jerking them off and for crack and all this stuff. You see, what we're going to do is we're going to inoculate the herd with these crazy stories about my drug addiction and sexual assaults and all this other stuff. And then when the real story comes out that I'm having an affair with my colleague, then we will inoculate the herd to that. They'll think that's all part of the same fake news story.
Wow.
Well, the problem was, as he's directing his staffer to do that, the staffer has the microphone on his phone recording the entire conversation, which he takes to the Detroit News. So this became quite a long story, and believe me, the expulsion hearings were fun to watch.
Wow.
And in fact, 2020 did an entire episode about them. So yeah, Todd Courser had to resign. Gamrat had to be expelled, I think.
That sounds like a hell of a soap opera right there. Oh, yeah. Man. Oof.
Crazy stuff happens in politics all the time.
You can't make this stuff up.
Nope. No, you can't. So, but this is why it's good to have people out there getting the story. And by the way, going back to what we were talking about earlier about keeping track of legislation. I want to show you, if you guys don't know about this site, this is michiganvotes.org, and it's run by the Mackinac Center, and they give you really nice sort of brief analysis of these different bills. And the guy who writes them just has a knack for being really to the point. So like, here's one. Senate Bill 128, impose same expanded hours mandate on both new and used car dealers. And then the description, to impose a new mandate on both new and used auto dealers that they must be open for 30 hours per week during at least 48 weeks a year. This would likely have no effect on new car dealers whose generally larger operations and costs make them likely to keep long hours already, but the additional burden could force some used car dealers to go out of business. So you see, he really elegantly lays out exactly what the game is. And so he's got these different descriptions for all the bills. The guy who writes these descriptions, by the way, is retiring soon. So we need some good legislative analysts out there. So if you know anyone, or if you yourself want to start taking a crack at these, I can only say it comes from experience. And, you know, I don't think it's a job in my future because I've got one doing what I'm doing right now, but there is definitely room out there for folks that know how to read legislation. And
Hey, I'm sorry. I'll be right back. Okay.
yeah, you go ahead, buddy.
Sorry about that.
So for any folks listening, if you want, perhaps, and again, I'm not promising there's a job open for you, but I can tell you at rescuemichigan.com, we need people doing this kind of stuff too. We've got this, hold on, it's loading up here. We've got these user forums. And you got to log in. I'm just going to log in here real quick. Hold on, let me just pull it off screen so I can do it privately. There we go. And at Grassroots HQ, there's a forum down here, and it's also linked to the top of the page on your name. Actually, not at the top of the page. It's in Member Forum on the Action tab here. And we've got state legislation where we need folks that can start breaking these things down. Our forum is actually broken down into committees so that we can keep track of these different things. So please, folks, take advantage of this resource. Sign up at rescuemichigan.com. I know there's a lot of groups out there that are already tracking legislation, and we don't need 100 different groups reinventing the wheel all the time. So take advantage of our site, make use of these tools. So I'm gonna go back to the single screen for now. Well, actually, I'm not, 'cause I gotta leave John up because otherwise I won't see. Oh, there he is. Okay.
Hey, I'm back. Sorry.
No problem, man. I was just talking about our user forum and encouraging people to start using that. I've been meaning to promote that more these last couple of weeks, but there's been so much going on. It's just, I have not had time to keep up with our site. It's very frustrating.
No, there's a lot always going on, especially in the political arena. Oh, no.
Yeah.
You guys have any idea how many bills are getting passed, like, every day? Or just trying to get passed, or just being presented? It's amazing. It's just...
Yeah, the legislature, typically they meet on Tuesdays, Wednesdays, and Thursdays. And they're off for most of the entire summer. They take a couple of weeks break in the spring, take a couple weeks break in the fall. And they'll take a much longer break next year around election time. And then in a typical legislative day, it depends on the time of year. And depends on sometimes there'll be one package that's really one thing, but it's in multiple bills. But it can be as many, I mean, well, depending, it can be a huge number, but on a typical week, they'll pass maybe a dozen, maybe as many as 24 bills, usually not quite that many. But it doesn't mean you don't want to be vigilant. The committees are there. Every single step in the process is a killing ground for a bill. Some bills die in committee, some bills get to the floor, some bills get to the other house and then never get a hearing over there. And you never really know where things are going to go. When we had Senate Bill 250, that was moving fast before we sent out an email blast and got, I think, 4,000 signatures out to the legislature, and that jammed up the works on it.
Man, that was awesome. And that started in the Senate, and it was like working its way back to the House.
Yep.
That was scary, even, because I think I don't know, I'm just assuming when a bill would start in the Senate, I think it would gather more support, rolling backward, because the senators thought of it. Of course, reps are going to go with it a lot more, a little more contentiously, a little more willingly, knowing that, hey, I'm going to support the senator's bill, so that's going to look good for me or whatever. Maybe they're thinking about their political future.
Yeah, the Senate's generally considered the upper chamber, but a bill can start in either one and a bill can die in either one. And what usually goes on behind the scenes is there's negotiations. They'll say, well, our caucus wants this and our caucus wants that. And there was more of that, I think, when the governor was a Republican than there is now, because now they're just trying to get past whatever they can. But it really all depends on the issue. And you have to, if you're doing a legislative project, like let's say you're doing a gun rights project, and you look at the different members of the House, you look at the different members of the Senate, and on that issue, I'd say you probably have a more friendly environment in the House than in the Senate. So what I'd propose in that case is starting in the Senate, because if you get out of the Senate, it's going to probably slide through the House, because they usually have more deference to the bills that start in the other chamber. In the Senate, they'll be more careful about their own bills. In the House, they'll be more careful about their own bills. But you just never know. It really depends on the issue. It depends on the topic. And I could go for a long time talking about how to develop a legislative project. But some people have an approach of just doing everything you can and seeing what sticks. And sometimes that works too. And some lawmakers, that's their approach too. There was one guy, he's now a county commissioner, but he was in the Senate until recently. Pete Lucido would just put in bill after bill after bill after bill after bill, and some of them made it and some of them don't, and you just never know. I think that his approach literally was throw it all at the wall and see what sticks. So, hey, that's the way some people do it.
I like the way he argued in a lot of things when I saw him, arguing with the Dominion trials and, with the election. I liked because he would argue, pretty much the legalities around the paperwork, the structure, not literally the crime itself, but like, was there proper training, or was there training manuals, or can we see the training, like on the technicality aspects surrounding the actual, the situation. It seems like he was a tactician at arguing that type of, bringing those type of arguments forward. So, I mean,
he was an attorney too.
Yeah, he gained him a lot of my respect because I saw him taking a different tact on arguments than the other senators were doing. So what was your overall outlook on Lucido? What did you think about him?
He has a Trump vibe to him. He has a vibe of, and I also know because I've known some people that worked for him. He'd make them get into the office at 7 a.m. and wouldn't let them go home till 6 at night. And and a lot of lawmakers put a lot on their staff, but not that much. That was more than they're used to. Right. I remember I met him once. We were waiting to go into a hearing at one point, and I'd mentioned I used to work in Congress. And he was like, "Hey, what's that like?" Because he was thinking about running for Congress at one point. And I was like, "Well, it's on one hand it's really exciting, and on the other hand it's really frustrating. It's on one hand you're in this amazing arena, on the other hand you can't do anything." He's like, "Yeah," and a lot of politicians, I think, they hate having to deal with their colleagues in the legislature. They all want to be executives. And I think that's why Lucido is a lot happier to be a county prosecutor now than he is being a senator. So he doesn't have to persuade his colleagues to do anything. He just tells people what to do. And there's a lot of that. A lot of people, when they get to the I think another one would be Paul Mitchell, he's the retired congressman from the 10th congressional district. He was this big shot businessman, and he went to run for Congress in central Michigan in Midland in 2014, and he lost. And then he spent several million dollars. He moved over to the Thumb and spent another bunch of millions of dollars to run for the seat in Congress there. And then after a couple of terms, he just quit. And I think he had the same experience. He's like, I just don't like having to deal with 434 other colleagues and have to negotiate with people. F this. And I think that's where a lot of businessmen come from when they get into politics. This is not what I signed up for. I thought it was going to be important. And it's like, well, on one hand, you kind of are. If you're a state senator, you're representing more than 250,000 people. You're their only voice in the state Senate. But at the same time, you're 1/38 of 1/2 of 1/3 of the state government. It doesn't sound so big when you put it that way.
No, but at least you have a piece of it. You have one part.
Yeah.
Exactly.
But the lawmakers get to liking it usually. The Capitol is a special place to them, and it takes some going there before that wears off. And I hope for our listeners it wears off to you pretty quickly when you start going there on a regular basis and seeing what actually goes on there, and really starting to disabuse the public of the notion that these guys are all a bunch of geniuses that know what they're doing, because they're not. They're not at all. And the governor least of all.
Yes, there's some that's like, wow, really? Like, it's just mind-boggling. Like I said, it's just the way that some of them argue some of the bills or their side, or it could be almost entertaining actually to see them start to argue back and forth, and it's fun, to believe it or not. And I never thought I would say that. Just being a part of the process and seeing how everything's done, it's actually quite fascinating, especially when you're in that old building, the Capitol. It's like you can feel, how it was when that Capitol was being built and Michigan was first becoming established, and the Michigan Constitution was being drafted up. I don't know, maybe I'm being a little nostalgic or something, but it's just, it feels special, like you're really a part of something when you get to see this whole process, you know, taking effect and being put in effect, just working, you know. But then see the bad bills trying to come through, and you're like, oh yeah, I can see how this doesn't really work for us, and you know, that's why we need.
They make the Capitol so fancy to impress you and to humble you, and to make you nervous when you speak before this vaunted body. But when you start to peel it back and you start to see how the system really operates, you realize these are just ordinary people who barely know what they're doing the next day, and the best they can do is when you catch them screwing up on something big, like SB 250 for example, and you call them out on it, and suddenly the behavior changes, then you start looking at them differently. Then it's like, you know what? These people aren't our betters. These are like replaceable parts. And
they make mistakes. They make a lot of mistakes, and I think a big part of it is they don't really read the bills. You know, maybe their staffers are just going over it, or they're getting word of what it's about, and they just support it because their buddy told them what it's about, or I don't know. But they're not really reading the bills, I don't think.
No. They probably don't even listen to their staff on most of them. They read the policy memos that come from leadership. That's pretty much how that goes. And usually the only questions are, who's supporting this? Who's opposed to it? Why should I care? Okay, I'll vote for it.
Right.
And sometimes there's other things. I mean, they have discussion on the floor. They have discussion in caucus. And they have meetings with lobbyists, sometimes not appropriate meetings with lobbyists, but usually appropriate, right? and they give them their talking points on one thing or another.
Well, my favorite thing is when they refer to themselves as lawmakers, and they like to say that over politicians. They don't like to be called politicians. And I'm like, wait a minute. Weren't you elected and you run for office? And isn't that political?
Yeah. And by the way, here's a secret. Most of the laws that they make, they didn't make at all. Most of them, leadership gives them.
Gotcha. That makes sense.
They'll have their own pet projects here and there, and those are usually the worst of them. Like, we have one guy who used to be probably still is a funeral director, so he has his pet funeral director's bill. Another guy owns a steakhouse, so he's always doing restaurant stuff. But for the most part, outside their personal interests, they just get fed bills by leadership, and they're like, okay, yeah, I'll do this one, sure. They don't even write them most of the time.
Wow, I didn't even know that.
Yeah. And then the other thing, the sad thing is, especially for them, those that are in their third term right now, and also really for all of them, is they will at some point get around to thinking about their legacy, and to be able to look back, because their time is limited by term limits, so they're going to look back someday. They only have so much time to be a lawmaker, and they all desperately want to have something they can say, here's what I did, here's the difference that I made. And how do you do that if you're a Republican and the governor is Gretchen Whitmer?
That's another.
You can't do anything good.
That's something I want to ask. You know, because you're going to definitely have way more insight than I would for sure. And I really don't want to do the research tonight. I'm very tired, by the way.
Yeah, man. If there's anything else you want to talk about, because you mentioned you did 3 things today. We talked about that gun rights rally, but I want to hear about the other things you were doing too. But we can wrap it up soon too. I know it's late.
There was a Freedom March event at the Capitol, so I had to attend that because it was it's not too far from the house. It's here in Lansing. It's not out in Fowlerville, but a lot of the people that went to the 2A rally were actually at the Freedom March here at the Capitol. And I think that was hosted by Jason Howland, and guest speaker again was Ryan Kelly. They had Melissa Pogo. What's her name, babe? Poga? I don't want to mispronounce her name. She sits on the board of county commissioners for Muskegon.
Okay.
Melissa Pogo. I'm sorry, Melissa, if I mispronounced your name.
You're all good.
She has done amazing things with her district, by the way, by recruiting over 20 delegates, and just taking a grassroots effort and just revamping the whole Muskegon, her district in Muskegon. So she's done amazing things with what she's done.
Good for her.
But a question that I have is, You know, we have a lot of our legislators and senators working on these bills. Some of these bills that do pass the committee, the House, and then the Senate are really for the best interest of the people. But when the governor so easily just signs a veto or no, or just nope, we're not going to sign it into action. Is there any recourse that the people can expect after a bill's been vetoed by the governor? I mean, isn't there some limitations that the governor does have when it comes to vetoing a bill?
Not really. You can pass a law over a veto if you've got a 2/3 majority in both chambers. But other than that, only other thing to do is wait for a better governor and keep on doing it, keep on pushing it. And sometimes that's what it takes.
Since we have the majority of the House, is that possible that we could get those numbers, or do we need a?
You mean in the next election?
Well, no, now. We don't have majority of House?
Oh, well, depending on what the issue is, but if you would have to get Democrats to vote to overturn the governor's veto.
Oh, yeah,
and they're not going to want to, even if they actually are with you on the issue. I'll give you an example. This was in 2019. A bill came out to fund the Wrongful Imprisonment Compensation Act. Here's what happened. A few years earlier, Michigan passed something called the Wrongful Imprisonment Compensation Act, which says if you were wrongfully imprisoned, you were found to have not been guilty of the crime that you were convicted and sentenced to, the state will reimburse you for $50,000 for every year that you were wrongly incarcerated, right?
Mm-hmm.
Well, it turns out there were more wrongly incarcerated people than they thought. Or perhaps not. Perhaps judges and lawyers started finding more people to call wrongfully incarcerated. I'm thinking about the Central Park 5 here, but never mind that. Either way, 2019...
There's a possibility, though.
Yeah, either way, 2019 comes around, and the fund has no money in it. And there's prisoners that are waiting, that are newly released now, because they were wrongly convicted, at least according to the law. And one of them had been wrongly convicted for 55 years. So he was owed a good chunk of change by the state, right?
Mm-hmm.
So the state House and Senate passed a bill to put that money into the Wrongful Imprisonment Compensation Act. It passed unanimously in both chambers. And for good reason, right? You know, because people are out there, they are owed money by the state. I remember talking to legislative counsel. I'm like, can't a court like garnish the treasury for that money? He says, no, they cannot do that. The Constitution in Michigan absolutely prohibits any appropriation, any payment from the state for anything, even with a court judgment from the state, without an appropriation by the legislature. And the idea is that was supposed to be a taxpayer protection. Right or wrong, that's what it is. So he says, no, there's absolutely no way you can get them their money, even though they've been adjudicated to be owed the money. Even if the state has said they are owed the money, you still can't give them the money until the legislature passes the money. So anyway, legislature passes the money unanimously. Governor Whitmer vetoes it. You know why?
No.
Because when the governor was running for office, she was campaigning on a talking point against right to work. And I know that doesn't make any sense whatsoever, but let me explain. When we passed right to work in 2012, we passed right to work. There's a weird provision in the Michigan Constitution that says you can have a referendum on a bill, meaning if you get the signatures, the people of Michigan can have a vote at the polls to overturn a law called a referendum. However, a law is referendum proof if it contains any appropriation. So what the people that passed right to work did, knowing that the labor bosses were going to spend millions of dollars to repeal right to work on a referendum, they put in a minor appropriation to pay for it to make the bill referendum proof. So when Gretchen Whitmer is running for governor, she promises, I'm going to veto any spending bill that's not part of a budget. So first bill that comes to her desk that's a spending bill that's not part of the budget is to pay the wrongfully convicted prisoners the money that they're owed. And she vetoes it because she has to prove what a strong, powerful woman she is.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, what a disgrace.
Yeah.
And what the legislature should have done at that point, and by the way, I've heard they regretted not doing it, is had a vote to overturn her veto, because that bill passed unanimously in both chambers. Because nobody was going to say, oh yeah, I don't support giving the wrongfully convicted the money that the state is owed. They could have voted to overturn a veto. They didn't do that because they didn't want to make the governor. They didn't want to make the governor angry.
So what happened?
Well, several months later, they put the appropriation in the budget. And so, you know, the prisoners just had to wait a few extra months for their money. So they could, because the governor had to show the legislature how tough she was, and the legislature had to show the governor how weak they were.
Wow.
So that's how that went.
Yeah.
So figure that one out, and ask me again if you think you're gonna pass a bill over a veto without 2/3 majority of Republicans in the House and Senate. So no, the only answer is, I mean, other than a citizen-initiated law, that's the only way around the governor's veto pen. But that is a huge amount of time, money, and resources. You can't just do that all the time. For a big thing like the election reform plan, or, you know, for Unlock Michigan, yeah, we can get that done. But for anything less than that, it's a tough road to hoe. But I would say it can be done in the long term. And some things take years and years to do. Right to work, Michigan was the exception. Right to work laws usually take a decade or more to pass in a legislature because they're fighting with union bosses, and it takes years and years and years and years and years. So on that note, since it's late, I know you're tired, I know you want to get going. We've covered a lot of stuff, so I want to give a plug to everybody because we were also talking about Muskegon. We've got a school coming up, and this is the school that trained me, by the way, 13 years ago. The Foundation for Applied Conservative Leadership is hosting a political leadership school in Muskegon this coming Saturday. There's a link for it on my screen here. You can see it there, and you can copy and, well, you can write it down now, or else when the video is on YouTube, you can just pause the video here and copy down that link. But here it is. This is the Foundation for Applied Conservative Leadership. They do these one-day schools all around the country, and they're doing one this next Saturday in Muskegon. They were going to do one in Gaylord in a couple of weeks, but it got postponed because of there's a big Mike Lindell event coming, but that's another story. Anyway, the school's in Muskegon. It is an all-day school. How to be effective in politics. I highly recommend this training. As I say, this is the political school that I came from, and it is, for my money, still the best there is. So check it out. It is reasonable. It's at the Fulkert Community Hub in Norton Shores. It is it starts at 9:00 a.m. goes to 5:30 p.m. It is $50 for general admission or $30 for students. So you can register for the class at this page. Please do that. You may be able to register at the last minute, but I know from groups that organize these kind of things, they really prefer to get them done early so they can order their lunch and everything else. But I highly recommend these schools, guys. Please go if you're looking for how to become effective in the legislature. This is a group that takes this confrontational attitude. It says it right here. Unless you are politically feared, you will not be politically respected. Learn why this works and how you can be feared and respected by politicians in the fight for liberty. This is a practical, no-nonsense training built around cutting-edge political strategies and tactics, some of which we've talked about tonight. And this goes into much, much more depth than you'll get anywhere else, other than through their advanced schools. If you are tired of crony capitalism, corporate handouts, and politicians only looking for their next re-election, this class might be for you. Intense one-day training covers the real nature of politics, why just educating people alone won't result in change, the biggest lie in politics, and how the political class uses your convictions against you. I know what it is, but I'm not going to tell you because you have to go to the school. Maybe we'll talk about it some other time. How to work effectively at the Capitol, getting a bill sponsor and a roll call vote despite the leadership, and how to put pressure on lawmakers. And these guys have trained tens of thousands of people all across the country, not just in Michigan. So that school is coming up next week, and there will be another one, I think, in the first week of July in Gaylord. And hopefully more around the state soon. And who knows, I've taken the course more than 10 times now, so I could probably teach it sometime, and maybe I will.
That's awesome. 10 times. That is great, man.
So yeah, check that out, guys. I hope they have a successful event there, and I hope you guys all become grassroots leaders. So John, again, I want to thank you for all that you're doing. Like I say, you're someone who has exhibited a natural talent at let me get you back in the chat here. There we go. A natural talent at a lot of the kind of things that they teach at these schools. One is getting in front of politicians' faces, getting them on record. The aspect of street theory you've already shown a talent for, which they teach at some of these schools, but not most of them, except for the ones that my friends do that have done some of these things themselves. But you're doing great work there, buddy. So if you guys watching this haven't already checked it out, go to UsAgainstMedia.com. Give us some plugs, man. I saw you guys have a Rumble channel. Is that all in from your website? Is there anything else they can do to get connected with you?
Everything's linked up to the website down at the bottom of the homepage. You can see follow us, and there's all of our social links there. Like I said, it's just not me. It's my wife, Rachel. She helps with doing the camera work. I have Adam Boyd, who wrote an amazing article tonight about how Marlena, Pavlos Hackney, she was railroaded by the circuit courts once again. So he wrote an amazing article on that. You can go and check that out. It's the first series of articles that you'll see on the Carousel homepage there. Yeah. You just want to read about there. And we have another author, journalist in Detroit. Her name is Celeste Mantag, and she does a great job down there as well. I'm really appreciative of those people who can put in what they can to make Us Against Media what it is today, because it's not about one person or one vision. It's literally us. All of us need to join together to fight the media, honestly.
Well, and as I was saying in the beginning, I think you're right that is one of the most central issues that all of these other ones are flowing from. I can't imagine we would have these ongoing lockdowns if there wasn't almost unanimous condoning of it and encouraging it in the mass media. And these people need to be confronted. They need to be called out. They need to be humiliated and embarrassed and boycotted, and they need to be replaced ultimately by groups like yours. So keep doing what you're doing, buddy. You guys are doing outstanding work. So thanks for coming on the show tonight. We really appreciate everything you're doing, and look forward to seeing lots of great new content from you. So folks, if you haven't already, check out their website. Do you have some way to, do you have like an email list or something people can sign up for?
I used to, but I've taken that down. I'm really just focusing on just creating good content.
Right on.
Well, I think that's what's more important right now, and that takes a lot of focus. It takes a lot of time, a lot of energy. So
yeah,
as much as I would like to put together an email blast, an email list, you really don't need to just go to the website and you'll find what you need to read, honestly.
Yeah, and I know personally, like I have difficulty. Let me put it this way: I cannot keep up with putting all of our stuff on social media. There's just too much of it out there. Maybe at some point soon we'll start bringing in some people that can help us out with that, because I think an element of that is important. And you do got to keep getting in people's faces constantly. And part of the reason why we've been able to keep ourselves in the discussion is that we keep reminding people, here's what we're doing, here's what we're doing, here's what we're doing. So I wish you guys the best. I hope you guys can bring some more people on your team, get and have a force multiplier to get you guys putting out more and more content like this, because this is the kind of stuff that we need. So John, thanks so much for joining us. Sorry, go ahead.
Yeah, no, thank you for what you do. I think what you bring to the table is amazing. The expertise, the level of expertise that you have in the political arena is amazing. And I love to be able to hear you talk and pick your brain, because I know I feel myself absorbing that, and I want more of that.
Right on, man. Well, as long as we got more viewers, I'll keep making content. This is, and by the way, I am not a public speaker by background. This is something I have actually been deliberately avoiding for, I think, about 13 years in politics now. And at some point I found, I was like, you know what? Someone's got to start talking about this stuff, because nobody else is. So I'm gonna keep putting out my stuff, and you do the same, buddy, because you're doing great work, and the movement's glad to have you covering it, because we certainly don't have the mass media on our side. But I think as your reputation builds as someone that's been documenting the grassroots movement in Michigan, and also exposing what's been going on in our houses of power in our state, you're going to see more and more people paying more attention to you. So, all right, guys, if anybody in the chat wants to add anything before we wrap it up, if you have any questions or comments, we'd love to hear them. It looks like we don't have as many people as we did in the start, so if we have any questions. Oh, Lori's got a question. I'd like to know how soon after the bill goes to the Senate or House, what's the easiest way to learn what passes and what doesn't? As far as the way to learn what passes and what doesn't, a couple of things you can do. One is that site I had up earlier, michiganvotes.org, is updated very frequently. You can also use the legislature's own website, legislature.mi.gov. You You can put a bill number in there and it'll tell you exactly what's going on with any given bill. You can also go there to sign up for committee alerts, and that's a really good way to keep in touch with what the committees are doing. In fact, I'll put this on the screen just so you guys can see. So if I, oh, that's not the screen. Here we go. All right, I'll go to this website here, legislature.michigan.gov. That's what the website is here. And if you go to committees, you go to committees and you pick any committee name. Well, see these committees, it says sign up for meeting notifications. Any of these go to the same page. Oh wait, no, it doesn't. Hold on. Let me do this instead. I'm gonna go to this. I'm gonna go to house. I'm gonna Google Michigan. I said Michigan House Committees. I put in House Michigan Committees. Same thing. You'll get this page here, committee information. You click on that. You choose any committee. Doesn't matter which one you choose. And then it says, click here to subscribe. And you click on that, and that takes you to this page where it has the page to subscribe to any or all of the state house and senate committees, and then they will send you email alerts every time they schedule a meeting. So that's the easiest way to stay on top of what's going on in the committees in the legislature. So you can use that. And again, michiganvotes.org is also a really good resource for that. Other than that, stay with Us Against Media, see what they report for what's going on in the legislature, because the mass media is not going to do that, folks. So you have to do your own homework, unfortunately. And again, rescuemichigan.com, sign up, log in, go to our forums. We have state legislation forums. Please pick your top 4 or 5 most interesting committee assignments and go into that forum and start posting about what's going on, what's in the legislature, what bills should be in the legislature and aren't. And we'll see what we can do about that, because we actually still do have a few friends up there. So, all right. Well, thanks everybody for being here. And John, again, thank you for the show. And we've already done that enough times, so we're going to call it a night. Thanks everybody for all that you do for liberty. And I think we're going to have some exciting announcements coming up in the next 7 days on election integrity projects in the legislature, legislation moving forward in the House, and perhaps something much bigger is also coming very soon. So stay tuned for that. Thanks everybody. Hope you have a great